Okay, Chair, we're now live if you would like to make a start.
Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Teesside Pension Board. Can I remind all participants that normal rules of procedure apply? For example, comments and questions need to be directed through the Chair. As this meeting is being live screened, can I remind all participants that their conduct should reflect this, as I'm sure it will. While members of the public can view this meeting via YouTube Live, they won't be able to actively participate or comment on proceedings. The agenda and papers for this afternoon's meeting are available on the Middlesbrough Council website for those who want to follow the proceedings. Apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair, I've received apologies from Gary Whitehouse and also Leanne Littlewood. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And we're hoping that Councillor Eyre might be able to join us later.
That's right, Chair.
Declarations of interest. I suspect it's the usual declarations of interest from, I think, everyone. Yes, everyone here who's a member, as a members of the Teesside Pension Fund. Any other declarations of interest other than that? Okay, thank you. The minutes of the Pension Board meeting of the 27th of July. First of all, just for accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. In that case, we can record the minutes as being an accurate record of the meeting. I don't think there are any matters arising that won't occur anywhere else. Nick?
Yeah, just to mention, Chair, there's a couple of points in the minutes where it refers to the annual report that we looked at of the pension fund, and there were some corrections that needed to be made. I was hoping to tell you that the annual report of the pension fund was finalised by now, but we're still waiting for the council's report and accounts to be finally complete, which will, I understand, happen by the end of November.
Okay, thank you. And presumably members will receive a notification by email when they're available, and we can get them on the link.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Okay. The minutes of the Teesside Pension Fund Committee of the 22nd of July, which are really just there for information. We had an oral report from Nick at the last meeting. Are there any comments or questions on those minutes? Okay, thank you. And then an oral update on the last meeting of the Teesside Pension Fund Committee, which took place on the 16th of September. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we ran through the usual set of reports at the committee meeting. Particularly, we looked at the investment activity report. That showed a much better picture than the previous meeting. So the valuation at the end of June was about 4.1 billion, which is roughly flat over the course of a year, but was an increase of about 400 million compared with the end of March valuation. And that was really just reflecting the sort of bounce back in markets that happened between March and the end of June. Obviously, it's been a bit rocky since then as well in certain areas of markets, but it did show a much more promising valuation than we've been able to show at the previous meeting. We had a presentation from Border to Coast as well. That was interesting. They were basically showing that the equity investments we've got with Border to Coast continue to hit their targets, which is 1% above the benchmarks for those funds. It's still early days, but it's nevertheless quite promising that they are sort of meeting their targets for our investments. The organisation itself, Border to Coast, as it showed in the presentation, is continuing to grow. It's got 84 members of staff now and 9 different investment funds, and we invest in 4 of them. We had reports from the investment advisors, Peter Moon and William Bourne. They weren't very upbeat about many investment asset classes, it's safe to say, although they did favour equities and alternatives above some of the other asset classes at the moment. We had a presentation from Andrew Owen at CBRE on the property side. At the 30th of June, we had 28 mixed-use properties, so we've still got 28 properties, which are worth collectively around 270 million. And the fund is still looking to acquire more property to increase its property weighting to the level our target level. We've recently agreed terms on a highly regarded long-let supermarket, as we described it in the minutes, in the report, should I say. So you have to guess who that highly regarded long-let supermarket is, but we're hoping to make an announcement on that in the next few weeks. We'll know about it in the next few weeks, and we'll tell you at the next meeting. We've also been working with CBRE, and they spoke at the meeting as well about arrears. So one of the issues with the pandemic situation is that lots of companies haven't been able to pay the rent to their landlords necessarily, and also the government has relaxed the rules to a certain extent, so it's easier for tenants to not pay the rent because it's harder for landlords to pursue them because they've removed some of the legal avenues that we have had in the past. So that has meant that rent collection has become a bit tricky for CBRE, although they're doing pretty well. They've managed to collect, I think it was 87% of the rent that was due for the 30th of June quarter, so they're doing pretty well. But there are one or two, I think there's 3 companies that we're having problems with. Other investors are also having problems with these companies. These companies have taken a stance. They're all sort of fairly large national or even international companies that have taken a stance that they're not going to pay the rent because they can legally get away with not paying it at the moment. So for cash flow reasons, they're not paying us. So there's maybe 3 companies that we're still working on, if you like. So that was interesting, and there was also a report on current issues affecting the local government scheme, which is covered in this agenda, so I won't tell you about that one. We had a report from Graham about the administration. Again, we've got that's covered in this report, an update on that. And we also, in the private part of the meeting, had a local investment proposal, which was, I think it's safe to say, I can report this now because the committee agreed to make this investment, and that was an investment in a company called the Ethical Housing Company based in Redcar, who provide rented accommodation, buy property. They'll be buying properties. They buy properties and rent them to people in an ethical way. So it's a way of ensuring that tenants get a fair deal out of the private rented sector, but at the same time, it's profitable and profitable enough for the pension fund to consider investing in it. So we will be making a small, by our standard sort of proportions, a reasonably small investment in that organisation, and I'll obviously report back on that as and when that develops. So that was it for the committee meeting.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Any questions for him? Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that actually, I think things have gone a lot better than we expected with the COVID-19. I expected us to go further down than we actually did, and for us to come back as quickly as we have. I think it shows that people are actually happy with what we do, but I also feel that the people out there are working hard to keep things ticking over and being good investments, if you like. So I would just like to thank them, the committee, for all the work that they do and all the investment that they are getting in. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I mean, it's good to know that things seem to be going on pretty well unchanged despite all the pressures and all the difficulties. Any other questions or comments? Where are we, Nick, on matching up our actual investment profile against the theoretical profile? Because we know that we've deviated from that, and there was some discussion at the last meeting as to the extent to which perhaps the theoretical profile needs to be adjusted to match the reality over the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, that's right. I think the main deviation, or one of the biggest deviations, is the fact that we're about 75% invested in equity, and our strategic asset allocation says 50% invested in equity. And I suppose the other one is that our strategic asset allocation says 18% invested in bonds, and we've got nothing invested in bonds. So we've had discussions with our advisors over a number of months on this, and we had a meeting with them last week. Not a physical meeting, a call with them last week to discuss this. We've got another meeting in a couple of weeks' time, another call with them in a couple of weeks' time, because we're basically going back to basics and saying, realistically, do we think 50% equities is the right target, or do we think we should have a target of 55 or 60? Because we're clearly not going to find things that provide us what equity provides us very easily, or it's going to take a long time. So wouldn't it be better to have a target that we've got some chance of reaching rather than a target that's unachievable? So we're looking at reviewing the strategic asset allocation, and as I say, we've got a further meeting with our advisors in a couple of weeks' time. And I think the other issue that we had with our strategic asset allocation was it was set by people that are no longer with the team, if you like. So it wasn't something that the team is all fully bought into and signed up to. So we want to get one that we're all bought into and fully signed up to, that we can work towards in a more strategic way. But we'll obviously, you will see, the board will see, as and when we do change our strategic asset allocation. But we're expecting to come up with a formal review of it in the next few months, which will go to the committee first.
I think it might be helpful, Nick, if we could have a report circulated to members once you've had the latest round of meetings with the advisors. I think the difficulty to the board is, I mean, clearly there are good reasons why there's a significant difference between actuality and the strategic asset allocation. There are good reasons for that. But as far as the board is concerned, it's an ongoing issue that there is such a big disparity that on the face of it doesn't seem to be addressed, or at least any reports that we get on how it's being addressed, by definition, are a few months out of date. So I think it would be helpful once you've finished your next round of meetings with the advisors, if you could update us on the situation.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I can certainly bring something to the next board meeting which sets out where we are with the strategic asset allocation, and why we're deviating from it, as you say, and when we think we'll be able to get closer to it. That would help.
Yes, I mean, my suggestion was that we perhaps get a information circulated to us before the next meeting. I mean, if you're planning to have a meeting or a couple of meetings within the next month, then maybe by Christmas we could have a note for information just sent round to the board. Presumably the committee have a similar interest, but how the committee organises itself is up to it, really.
Okay, I can certainly take that away. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. You mentioned the impact of the rent holiday, as it were, on the fund. Presumably, I mean, although we're talking about 3 major companies, the financial impact for us is really quite minor.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, this isn't money that we don't think we will. We're not writing this off. We think we will get this money. It's more about a timing issue when we'll get the money. So, and also, as you say, I believe it was, I think I'm having a look at the committee minutes. I believe it was 87% they said has been recovered of the rent due at that point. And obviously that figure goes up as more rent comes in. So it's important that we don't lose track of it, but it's not going to have a big financial impact on the pension fund at all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think that the final point for me on this item, I wonder whether the time has come for us to get a little bit more in touch with what Border to Coast is up to. We get the presentations, well, we hear of the presentations to the committee. We don't have a direct way of being kept informed of Border to Coast's progress, and there's been an ongoing issue, I think, for the board and indeed more broadly, I suspect, for the committee as well, about the impact of the government's requirement for us to pool our resources with other local government pension schemes. And I think there is an onus on us to ensure that we feel comfortable about the direction that Border to Coast is moving in, and that ultimately that we get value for money. I realise that Border to Coast has an agreed target of 2 or 3 years to be meeting its targets, but I think it's also useful for us to make sure that we've got our eye on the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you wanted to, we could probably take this offline perhaps, and if you wanted to let me know what you'd want Border to Coast to come and talk to you about in particular, I'm sure they'd be happy to come and present to a future board meeting.
Yeah. I think it might be helpful if we think in those terms, as you say. We can sort out the detail between now and the time when they're invited. But I think probably the time has come for us to have some more direct input from staff at Border to Coast.
I'm sure they'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Any other questions for Nick before we move on? Okay. Thank you. Item 6, pension board training. Over to you again, Nick.
Yeah, great, thanks. This is the annual report that we put on to remind board members of the legal requirement for all board members to have the necessary knowledge and understanding to carry out their role, and to outline and discuss how this level of competency could best be acquired and maintained. I'm also in this report referring to a knowledge assessment tool, which is something that Hymans Robertson, the firm of actuaries and consultants that do a lot of work with the local government pension scheme, they've developed this knowledge assessment tool, which is basically a way of assessing what the knowledge and understanding is of individual board members, and therefore of the board as a whole, and potentially of committee members and the committee as a whole. And the idea is to identify sort of gaps, really, and to help with targeting future training. And I've had a brief conversation with the chair of the committee about this, and he's quite supportive of the idea of doing this across the committee as well as across the board. I don't know how you feel about that. It's effectively like a multiple choice set of questions, if you like, on the different areas that are set out in the report. And the idea, obviously, it's not to sort of rank people and say who knows the most. It's more about identifying, as I say, where there are areas of need of training, both for the board as a whole and for individuals perhaps, but mainly for the board as a whole, and to look then at ways to fill those training needs. So what I'm asking the board is, if you're interested in that, and if you are, I will sort of progress the discussions with the chair of the committee, and we can set something up and do that as a way of assessing where everybody is.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions or comments? Jackie.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea that we do have some ongoing training, because things change within that time. Legislation may change, and also the gaps between which we have our committees or our board meetings. I think also it helps us to keep our skills up to date and our knowledge up to date. And I think when I read it, I thought this is exactly what we do need. So I for one, would agree with it.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments? Nick, do you know what form the questionnaire takes? And one of the good things about the pension regulator training was that you were presented with information and then assessed on it immediately afterwards. So there was a sort of link, as opposed to it being more, as opposed to it being something like a sort of GCSE exam or something, where you're being tested on your memory and on your recall. So I suppose my question is this what you might call formative assessment, or is it more like a test?
I haven't seen the full sort of knowledge assessment. I've seen a few example questions from it. I think it is more like a test, to be honest with you. But that's obviously not wanting to sound too daunting. But it looks more like that to me, about assessing, do you know what's typically found in, say, a funding strategy statement? What information would be in a funding strategy statement? Is information about this, or this, and you have to decide which you would expect to see in that document or whatever. So it's more that type of assessment. So yeah, it is more. The other interesting thing that obviously this organisation are getting out of it, and the people that participate in it get out of it as well, is it allows you to compare yourself with other funds if you wanted to say, well, we've done quite well. Who's done similarly well, or who's not done quite as well like us, and what did they do to correct that? So there's a bit of that around it as well.
Okay, thanks. I mean, certainly, it was very clear when the pension board was set up that we need to pay continuous attention to our training needs, and I think we've been working hard to try to do that. Probably after a number of years, it is about time for us to review the situation and just look at how much of our information is still current, whether it needs revising, and whether there are gaps. So I would certainly support us going forward and at least investigating this as a way forward. Are we generally comfortable with that? Yeah. Okay. So we'll leave it to you, Nick, to liaise with the chair of the committee, and we'll move forward.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Agenda item 7. Update on the work plan and communications. Nick again.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that we set in place at the February meeting, I think it was, a work plan for the months and years ahead to sort of try and put a bit of structure to the work of the board. And we used areas and things that the regulator and scheme advisory board had identified as important for local pension boards to consider. And the two things that were on the work plan for today's meeting were an annual review of board training, which we've just spoken about, and also communicating with members and publishing scheme information. So the activity that was suggested by the Scheme Advisory Board guidance is a review of standard employer and scheme member communications. And that's what the rest of the report looks at, really. I've talked about our communications policy in the report, which we've had in place for a number of years. And that sets out who we communicate to and how we will communicate to them. And the full communications policy is in Appendix A. And then in Appendix B, I've got some examples of scheme member and employer communications, which are listed in paragraph 6.2 of the report. So there's lots of examples of different scheme member and employer communications, and there's also in Appendix C, the board knows that we've provided additional funding to XPS administration to improve member communications, and as part of that process, XPS recently appointed a communications team member who's developing the existing website with a view to improving its navigation and functionality and content. And Appendix C's got some screenshots of the latest proposed upgrade to the pension fund website. So really, it's for discussion, I suppose, this paper and this report. Any comments you've got on the employer or member communications that we've shown in the appendices, and luckily we've got Graham here as well if you've got any questions or concerns, because it's his team that pulls all this together. And what struck me, I suppose, when I was compiling this, when I'd asked Graham for copies of the things, is that some of these communications are a lot more complicated than others, and the most complicated one, I think, is the pension savings statement, which, if you've looked at that, it's absolutely horrendous. But it's not because it's badly written, it's because it's such a complicated subject that needs a lot of information conveying, and it's a shining example of tax simplification, I think they used to call it at some point, which it isn't simple at all. It's very, very, very difficult. But thankfully, not very many of our members get a pension savings statement. It really applies to people whose active members who exceed or are likely to exceed the annual allowance for pension saving, which I think is at £40,000 at the moment. Is it, Graham?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So not many people get that, but it's quite complicated. But there's other sort of fairly complex communications in there as well, such as the options letter, retirement options letter. But again, that contains a lot of information. It needs to contain a lot of information, but I suppose it's whether you think the information is presented in a good way, and what you think about the general presentation of the communications. If you've got any comments or suggestions, that'd be interesting.
Thanks, Nick. I'll open it up in a minute. My initial reaction was surprised. I mean, I wasn't so surprised once I thought about it, but surprised at the variety and volume of documents that exist. And as you go through them, it becomes obvious why there are so many. But I suppose a realization that there's a lot of work goes on sort of below the surface, as it were, dealing with a whole range of diverse issues that need to be addressed for particular individuals. I was also struck and pleased by the fact that all the communications that I looked at closely came from named individuals, or at least purported to come from named individuals, with proper contact details, so that anyone who wasn't sure where they needed to go, there is at least a first point of contact there, which isn't always the case with documents that come from big organisations. So that was good. I'll open it up though for any comments or questions from colleagues. Nothing that anyone wants to say at the moment. Okay, thanks. I did wonder, I mean, it says somewhere that there are a number of documents that have a sort of 3-yearly refresh, which makes sense. There are 1 or 2 instances, though, where it's clear that documents need to be refreshed much more immediately than that. I mean, on page 23 of the pack that we've had, there are references to Kia, for example, and not XPS. On page 32, the reference to Paul Campbell rather than to you, Nick. And I think points like that really need to be brought up to date. Right, they can't be brought up to date sort of instantly, but within a month or two, I would hope that sort of detail, specific contacts, are brought up to date, so that when the document goes out to someone new, that they understand, for example, what the reference is. I mean, if you're new into a system, you wouldn't, for example, be aware that XPS is the new name, or well, the new organisation that's taken over from Kia. I also wondered, although I mean, I felt that in general the documents are pretty clear, and as you said, Nick, of necessity, some of them have to be really quite technical and quite detailed. I wonder whether you use any external readers just checking for clarity. Someone who isn't necessarily immersed in the world of pensions, but can just read it, as it were, as a naive outsider.
I'll leave that one for Graham, I think.
We will if we're doing a full rewrite of something. So the pension savings statements, we did actually get some people to read it, which tends to be just family members, to have a read through and see if they could understand it. But pension services, as Nick says, probably not the the best example, because that does become quite complex out of necessity. And our pension savings statement probably provides more information that is needed. But we feel that obviously for anybody who has got a tax charge because of an annual allowance charge, needs to know things like what the carry forward would be from previous years, where you legislatively wise, you don't need to show that information, but it's something that they will require at some point to be able to work out what actually is there. But we do try to make it as plain English as possible. Pensions sometimes does make it quite difficult to do so. Where we can, we do try to avoid 3-letter acronyms, which again is quite rife within pensions, and try to make it as simple as possible. Again, but there is certain phrasing that comes in pensions that you have to use. So things like commutation and that side of things you need to obviously always use. But we do try to put it through and get somebody who doesn't know pensions to read it through. But again, if you feel that maybe can come to the pension board, if we're doing a major update, then obviously we'll do that.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Can I just make a comment, Chair, please?
Yes, sorry, Chair.
You know, in those in that terminology, would you not, like your commutation, would you not give a definition for that for people who don't understand what it means? Because we have all different types of people who are in our pension scheme.
Yeah, we can look to do that. Just again, we try to keep the letters as short as possible as well, so we don't really want to put a big thing at the back of it. But then again, there could be something on the website with that information on there, so obviously we can just point them in that direction, which we try to do. But as I said, just make sure that's obviously highlighted a little bit better, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Actually, you know, you just say please refer to the website. I think that's good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'm certainly reassured by the fact that for the major documents and the major reissues, you have them read by some external source. It is something I'd encourage you to be doing on all the documents. As I said, I mean, it seemed to me that the amount of time that one can devote to reading 100 pages of document is limited. But from the look that I had, in general, they seemed fairly clear. But also, in my experience, having someone completely external who comes in cold to what the issues are can sometimes be helpful. On the website revamp, could you give us an update on where we are on that?
I think we were just updating the last few pages, and then it's almost ready to go live, which I'm expecting this month.
Right. So, I mean, but in effect, we're pretty well ready to go live.
Yeah.
And will that be a website that appears to be specific to the Teesside Pension Fund, or will it be going in through the XPS portal?
It will be a standalone one, but obviously we'll have XPS branding because obviously we built it. But yeah, it won't be going through be going through basically where the current one goes through the Teesside.
Yeah, it's just when I looked a couple of days ago, if I wanted to log into the system now, I was directed into a portal that is very much XPS and has references to the police service and all sorts of other pension schemes that XPS operates with. Is
this the My Own Pension one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's our landing site where we put all of our clients through there first, and obviously they choose the local government or they choose the police and fire.
So will it be possible for our pensioners, well, our members, to have a direct access to something that says Teesside Pension Fund at the outset, as opposed to having to navigate their way through XPS's other customers?
I'll check on that for you, Colin. I'll come back to you outside the meeting if you want. I'll send it to everybody. Yeah,
I think that would be helpful. Thanks very much. Any other questions or issues for Graham or indeed for Nick? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 8, an update on current issues. Perhaps if we take them one by one, Nick, and just pause so that if there are questions, because they're all quite different issues, if there are questions we can deal with them separately. Nick?
Absolutely, yeah, thanks. The first one on is paragraph 4, which is about the government consultation on a remedy for discrimination identified in the MacLeod/Scargent court cases. That's a bit of a mouthful. And what that basically means is when all the main public service pension schemes moved to being final salaries, from final salary schemes to career average schemes in 2014 and 2015, various different ways were identified to protect existing members and who were close to retirement, normally the ones close to retirement, to make sure that they weren't going to be any worse off by having moved into this different type of scheme. And in the local government scheme, the protection we have is known as the underpin, which is a check that's carried out when older members who were in the old scheme, when they draw the benefits, to see if they would have had higher benefits had the old final salary rules still applied. Now, this doesn't happen very often, so because what happens in the new career average scheme, or the scheme since 2014, benefits are built up at a 49th of your salary for every year, whereas in the previous scheme it was a 60th of your salary for every year. And a 49th of your salary is quite a bit more than a 60th of your salary. So the rate of building up pension in the new scheme is actually quite a lot higher than under the old final salary scheme. The reason why somebody might be worse off having moved to the career average scheme is if they get a pay rise or significant pay rises towards the end of their sort of time in the scheme, which in a final salary scheme would increase the value of all their benefits. But in a career average scheme, it wouldn't. It would only increase the value of the benefits in the final year, if you see what I mean. So there are some people that benefit from this underpin, and it only applies currently to people who were above a certain age. So you had to be 55 years old by 2014, I believe. So to benefit from this. Now, what happened was there was a court case which identified that because of this age issue, what the government had actually done was age discrimination. So they were penalising younger people who weren't benefiting from this protection. And so consequently, it was deemed to be unlawful. And this was a judgment that originally related to the firefighters and the judges' pension schemes. But the government confirmed in July 2019 that they'd accept this judgment across all public service pension schemes, and they recognised that the protections that they put in place had to be corrected to make sure that they weren't age discriminatory. It then took the government about a year to come up with their proposals for the local government scheme, which they published in a consultation on draft regulations in July earlier this year. The consultation actually closed in October, and what the consultation says it will do if the draft regulations go ahead as they're proposed is that it will effectively extend this protection to everybody, no matter how old they were, as long as they were actually in the scheme at April 2012, I think is the cut-off date they're using. Then everybody will get this check carried out when they leave to see whether they would have been better off under the final salary scheme or under the career average scheme as they are now. Now, we don't expect this is actually going to have much impact in terms of uplifting people's benefits, but will have a huge impact for Graham and his team in terms of administrative headache. And it's going to be difficult because also the proposal is that we go back and look at everybody that's left since April 2014. So these changes are going to have retrospective effect. Everyone that's left in the last 5 years or more will have to revisit their benefits and see whether they would have benefited from this or not. So then the knock-on effect from that is that in order to do that, you have to have the right information from the employers around, for example, changes to part-time hours. And this is the sort of information that employers might not have supplied to Graham and his team, because you don't need that sort of information to work out career average benefits, but you do need it to work out final salary benefits. So there'll be another exercise to make sure that all the right information can be collected off the employers to allow this check to be done. It's a bit of a headache, but I think unfortunately it's a necessary headache, because we've got to go ahead and find a way to make sure the scheme isn't breaking the law, isn't discriminatory. It's just a bit of a pain. And the actuary has done some costing on this. So what the actuary did at the last valuation, so the valuation as at the end of March 2019, where the contribution rates changed in April this year because of that valuation. The actuary made an assumption that this correction will be made and that this unfairness will be corrected. And because of that, the actuary has added 0.9% of pensionable pay to every employer's contribution rate. So he's added extra to employers' contribution rates, and that won't be the right amount necessarily, but it's an amount, and we won't know what the true cost is to employers until all this work's been done. But it's safe to say Aon, our scheme actuary, is fairly confident that what they've done is a reasonable approximation of what the actual cost of the scheme will be. XPS are considering best how to plan and resource for implementing the new underpin, and they've already communicated with employers to advise them that additional data is required. I think XPS also submitted a response to the government emphasising that the administrative complexity caused by the proposals, but still recognising that the need for the government to remove discrimination within the scheme. So that was that one.
Sorry, I'm wrestling with my technology here, the various ways of muting and unmuting myself. Graham, would you like to say just a little about what you think the impact of this might be in terms of staff resource and over what period of time?
With regards to staff resource, as Nick said, the big part will be also on the employers as well, because obviously we will need to collect. Although we've never stopped asking for the information, we know that some employees probably haven't been providing it, so we need to make certain that we've got all the information we require. But obviously that's not just going back to 2014, it will be going on until 2022. There'll also be a slight difference in pension benefits going forward, because again, we will have to give this better of, certainly probably between 2014 and 2022, when the regulations will change. Then we expect everybody then to go into some form of care scheme. The accrual rate will probably change, I would guess. And again, we'll have to look at, I've just looking at communications, look at what communications we're actually putting out. So obviously we'll need something in there to say that we're given the better of, and the reasons why. Potentially having to show why we believe it's the better of. So we've got to show both calculations, just so that the members see both sets of figures. Not that they would have the choice on that. And as I said, it's also holding a set of information that possibly we will never use, or it'll be there just as a checkpoint when somebody finally leaves and either takes a pension benefit or becomes a deferred. The big piece of work will be going back over everybody. And again, we're not expecting many, if any, to have the benefits changed, but obviously we'll have to make sure that that is the case, and inform and send a communication out to all those people to say, we've reviewed your benefits, this is what it is. That's probably the big job as part of this. We're looking to try and get a project team together that will be looking at this, and therefore hopefully it won't impact business as usual too much on the teams, apart from, as I said, that changing the communication, changing the calculation process slightly. But we're working with our software providers on that at the moment, and obviously they're a national software provider for a number of different authorities. So I know that they're working on a lot of different things of how that's going to work. And there was talk that potentially they're going to develop something that will do that historic bit of information as well, which could, depending on what that solution is, depends on exactly how much of an impact that would be on the resource.
Okay, thanks, Graham. It sounds like an awful lot of, well, not quite unnecessary work. Obviously, it's essential work for good legal reasons, but a lot of work that's been caused really as a consequence of sloppy legislation. But we just have to suffer it.
Yeah, and again, obviously, the impact will be felt all the way forward, because anybody who was in the scheme in 2012 and has care benefits, we will have to do that probably until they retire, to be able to do that comparison at some point.
Yeah. Any other questions on that particular item? Okay, Nick, move on. Reforming local government exit pay.
Yeah, there's a couple of things referenced here, really. One of them is legislation that's just been passed, or regulations that have just been passed around the £95,000 cap. So for about 5 years now, the government's been talking about introducing a limit on the amount of money that public sector workers can have when they leave an organisation. so typically on redundancy grounds. And they wanted, I think the original goal was not to have less than six-figure sums, if you like. So they came up with this idea that £95,000 would be the maximum that anyone could have in total when leaving a public sector organisation. And have recently legislated or put some regulations in place that put that in force for the local government scheme. And what it means for local government is the 95,000 doesn't just include payments made to the individual, such as redundancy payments. It also includes payments in respect of the individual. So money that is paid by the employer to the pension scheme to fund unreduced pension benefits on redundancy. Because what happens in our scheme when somebody is made redundant over the age of 55, leaves on redundancy or efficiency grounds over the age of 55, they get access to their pension benefits without any early retirement reductions applying. And that's quite a valuable sort of benefit, if you like, and quite expensive. And what it means is the employer has to pay money into the fund to pay for that. And that's the capital cost of early retirement. So those amounts can quite often be tens of thousands of pounds that are paid into the scheme in respect of one individual, particularly if that individual's got long service, if they're closer to age 55 as well. And obviously, as the salary is higher, it can be a bigger amount. So that's included within this £95,000 cap. As I say, the regulations were passed and put into and come into force in 2 days' time. But the issue that we have also got is the other change they're making, which is around wider changes to the pension regulations and to the benefits available to everybody who leaves over 55 on redundancy in our scheme. And the issue is that in order for this 95 grand cap regulation to work properly in conjunction with the rules of our scheme as they stand, we need this other set of legislation to be in force, and that hasn't been agreed yet. It hasn't been fully consulted on. It won't be coming in force until probably January next year at the earliest. So we've got a strange position at the moment where our scheme regulations say if you're made redundant over 55, you get access to your unreduced pension benefits, full stop. But this other legislation that says, no, hang on, you've got to check to see whether that's in total more than £95,000 that we're paying out in respect of you. So the two bits of regulations don't match up. We've had some information from a letter from a government minister last week telling us what we should do, what administering authorities should do. We've got some guidance from the Scheme Advisory Board. They've sought legal advice, which says something slightly different to what the minister says we should do. So it's another headache for Graham and his team. For anybody at the moment who we think is going to exceed that £95,000 cap, who leaves on redundancy grounds over age 55 between now and the rules being sorted out properly, there's a bit of a headache. And we're going to have to make some decisions about what to do. I'm probably going to follow the guidance from the local government authority, which is basically saying what you should do is allow the individual the choice of either having deferred benefits so they don't draw the pension at all, or taking completely reduced benefits as if they weren't being made redundant, as if they're leaving voluntarily, and that's it really. And at some point in the future they can get a payment from their employer as well. So it's a bit unsatisfactory, I think, where we are at the moment with that. But we are hopefully not going to get that many cases in our scheme where this will happen, but there will be some, I would imagine, between now and January or February. It's bound to be at least one. But the other sort of bigger change that they're putting through at the moment that will save employers money, but will mean individuals get worse benefits from the scheme, is around changes for everybody who gets made redundant, if you like, and saying that you can either have the maximum amount you can have paid to you will be either your redundancy payment or the payment that your employer makes for unreduced pension benefits, the capital cost amount. You can't have both. At the moment, people get both. So they get a redundancy lump sum and they also get their benefits unreduced. Now, what the government's saying is in future, when these new regulations come in, you'll have to choose which you want. either you want to get your redundancy lump sum or you want to get your unreduced pension. It's slightly more complicated than that, but that's the basic gist of it. And that, as I say, that will make the scheme less valuable for people who are leaving on redundancy or efficiency grounds, but it will save employers quite a lot of money. So we haven't got, the consultation on that hasn't finished, but we expect that those rules will come into force probably from January next year.
So potentially some issues there for people getting redundancy or early retirement, that they'll need to get some good up-to-date advice at the appropriate time.
Well, this is one of the big issues for us, and one of the things that we're going back with on the consultation responses. What it'll mean is that people will have choices to make. So, for example, you could be entitled to a redundancy lump sum of £16,000 from your employer, or your employer could pay £25,000 into your pension to boost it. Now, what would you choose? Now, clearly, you should choose boosting your pension by £25,000 worth. But if you want money up front, you might choose the money up front. And the problem is employers and administering authorities aren't authorised to give financial advice. We can't give financial advice. We're in a lot of trouble if we try and give financial advice. All we could do is signpost individuals to organisations that can give them this sort of advice. But in practice, most people choose cash when given the choice. Even when it's not in their best interests, they choose immediate cash rather than income for life. But yeah, it does generate a lot of issues like that, certainly.
Yeah. Any questions for Nick on that?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Billy.
The question, as in the past, we've had employees taking early retirement and taking whatever pension that they are entitled to. And then a couple of weeks later, or even after that weekend of them retiring, they've been taken back on again in the more or less the same role there, but with a slightly different administration there. But they've been they're doing the same job as what they were previously doing. Is that still the case? Can employees do that? And do you think it is right there that they can do? Because in most other industries, you take retirement, that's it. You can't go back to be in employment with them. Thank you, Chair.
Should I take that? Yep. I think, as I understand it, the government is also looking to legislate to stop that sort of thing happening, but they haven't done it yet. So they have talked about legislating to prevent people from being re-employed in the same capacity, shortly after being made redundant or whatever. But at present, I think it's up to individual employers to sort of police that. And I think the Middlesbrough Council has got some prohibition, some ban on re-employing people that have been made redundant. I sound a bit woolly on this, but yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some HR regulations preventing that. Or Jackie's going to help me here.
I'm going to help you out here. Yes, that is the case.
Yeah.
Middlesbrough Council's policy now, and in the past it has happened, but now it doesn't happen anymore. People are not taken back on once they have been made redundant, mainly because redundancy, in fairness, redundancy is about the job. It isn't actually about the individual. So your job is made redundant rather than you. It effectively, a redundancy is a dismissal. However, it is the job that's redundant. It's no longer required. So if they're coming back in the same capacity, the job is required. So there isn't a redundancy situation. However, Middlesbrough Council does not certainly employ anybody that has been made redundant. I don't know how it is in Redcar and Cleveland or Stockton or any of the other boroughs, but certainly Middlesbrough does have that policy enforced.
If I can,
Thank you,
Chair,
Jackie.
if I can, Chair,
Yeah, go on,
I
Billy.
know for a fact there in Redcar Cleveland it doesn't happen, but I know for a fact there that in Middlesbrough, going back some years ago,
It has in the
obviously,
past.
yeah,
Sorry, I interrupted there. I was thinking. Sorry.
that's quite okay, Jackie. Quite okay.
No, I agree with
Okay,
you.
Chair,
And
I'll leave it at that.
can I just
Okay,
say as
yeah,
well,
go on, Jackie.
this isn't index linked either, is it, Nick? The 95,000 is just an amount, as my understanding. It's not index linked, so
Right.
it won't change in the future. And I noticed as well on the report that it mentions compromise agreements. We no longer have compromise agreements. They're called settlement agreements. So that really needs to be changed, I think. I know it's semantics, but that's how it is in law now.
Helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I must say, I mean, my experience is that this has been, and probably still is, more of an issue in the civil service, and particularly in the private sector, rather than in local government. But it's I wonder whether this is also being applied to the civil service, and I wait for the time when something similar will be applied in the private sector as well. But in the meanwhile, we've got to obey the law, and the law gives Nick and Graham this particular headache, which I'm sure they'll cope with one way or another. Can we move on if we wrap up the other two items, Nick, on this in this report together?
Yeah, okay. That was there's the review of employer contributions and flexibility on exit payments, and this was about a consultation response to government confirming that it is going to allow administering authorities to review contributions for employers. At the moment, up until now, the contributions for employers are normally set every 3 years at the valuation, and this is flexibility that allow employers' contributions to be considered at different points between valuations for certain circumstances, and that's, for example, where there's been a significant change to the liabilities of an employer, or where there's been a significant change to an employer's covenant. That is how strong that employer is now able to pay its contributions. We think it is. Also, an employer can request a review of contributions from the authority, from the administering authority. So it's allowing more flexibility on that side of things. So if we had an employer in the scheme and we thought that we'd taken it on the ground and set a contribution rate on the grounds that it was a certain strength of employer, and something catastrophic happened to that employer, and we realised that maybe it's not as strong as we thought, and maybe we should be trying to collect more money off that employer, then we're able to reassess the contributions, or at least there's a mechanism to do that now. There's also more flexibility around employers exiting the scheme, and this is where an employer, this is normally like an admission body employer that's in the scheme for a set period of time normally. So it might have won a contract or employ people because it's won a contract for a specific period of time. So what would normally happen there is the employer will be in our scheme for a certain number of years, and when it leaves the scheme, the actuary will carry out an assessment and see whether the liabilities and the assets in relation to that employer are balanced against each other. And if they didn't, if the employer was in surplus, then we would make a payment to that employer potentially. If the employer was in deficit, then we would charge that employer. So we would send them a bill for hundreds of thousands of pounds potentially. And this allows us to have more flexibility in terms of spreading any payment like that. So if an employer leaves a scheme and it owes the administering authority money, we could decide to spread that payment over a number of years and introduce a new category employer into the scheme called deferred employer for us to set up this deferred debt agreement with them. And I've said in the report that I'm going to work with the scheme actuary to revise a funding strategy statement, because that's what we need to have, a consistent way of applying these new approaches. So we put it into our funding strategy statement and set out what our process will be. I had put in the report that we'd be looking to take that to the December committee, but my initial discussions with the scheme actuary have suggested that it might not be the December committee because we're waiting for some statutory guidance on this. We're waiting for some guidance. We're not going to get the guidance till after our committee in December, so it's all going to get a bit delayed, I think. But it's important that we do it in a consistent way, and one that's not just consistent internally with ourselves, if you like, but consistent with the way that other local government administering authorities do this. So that's why we're waiting for the guidance to make sure that we follow the same route as everybody else, or a similar route anyway. So that was that one. And the other one you wanted me to talk about as well, which is just a quick one, which will disappoint people of a certain age. This is increasing the age at which pensions can be accessed. So the government's talked about this before. In 2014, it talked about the fact that it wanted to increase the earliest age pensions could be drawn from 55 to 57. It didn't legislate for that, and it still hasn't legislated for it, but it has reinforced by a written statement to Parliament that it still intends to do this. And from 2028, at some point in 2028, people will have to wait till they're 57 at least before they draw a pension instead of 55. So that's to disappoint the young'uns in the audience, if there are any.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on any of that or any comments? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the last agenda item, item 9, the administration report, which I guess Graham is dealing with.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, this is the usual report, so maybe I'll skip most of the headlines as Nick's already covered those, which obviously is McLeod, which, as I said, you get very used to that over the next couple of years, I would think. And obviously the COVID response within XBS, the weekend's announcement, we're just waiting to see how that affects our policy. I'm hoping that it doesn't change our policy at the moment. As I said, our office is open 5 days a week at the moment. For those people who wish to turn up within the office, I'm hoping that continues for this next month. Looking at membership movements, usual slight movements up and down as we go along each quarter. Quarter 2 is probably down slightly on actives as we discover people on the year-end files who've left but also started. So obviously we chase that information up, which does affect the figures every time. So it seems to be a similar sort of thing from last quarter 2. Everything else you would expect. Registration for member self-service. Again, this is available for members. It's not really being promoted as much. It's in the newsletters on a regular basis, but as I said, it's probably not front and centre to allow people to access their pension records as we see them, so they can do calculations as they wish on the records. But as you can see, percentage-wise of those who are registered and also accessing the system is relatively low. A peak in September, probably due to the benefit statements going out, which tends to make obviously people then realise that they've got these pension benefits, and then we'll go on and see to have a look what they're about. October, that's part way through October obviously, but again it's still relatively high compared to previous months. But the trend is that will probably drop off again until next September when people come back on. Again, it might be something as part of the communication strategy of whether we want to promote that a little bit more, to allow people to access their pension records a bit quicker, and then they can do their own estimates and benefit projections, and obviously come to ourselves if they want a bit more detail. So complaints, again, although we look at the quarter just gone, we try to show the full year, so you can see what's been happening over the year to see if there's any trends coming. Not many are being put through, whether that's not many coming through but being dealt with on the phones or via initial communication before it gets a bit more formal. We may need to look at that to see if we can report it a little bit more in depth, so it does again give that trend if there is something coming in, even if it's just a case of that someone's complained, the actual person on the phone or in the office or at home at the moment has dealt with it. At least then we've got a record of what people are complaining about or raising issues about. We'll look at that and see what we can bring in for that. Annual benefit statements, as I said, should have been up 31st of August. So we've got an overview of what's actually happened. So active membership, 23,423. Active members at year end, Some of those dropped off because they would have changed status before we'd actually run the benefit statement. So obviously they were no longer active at that point, so we wouldn't send a benefit statement out. There's also a small amount that would not be produced. At this point it was 4.9%. So quite a large chunk of that was actually to do with missing care pay. Again, that might be where the year-end file has not shown that information correctly, so it's not gone onto the record, or we haven't received it at all. Again, we're reviewing those now and going back to the employers to try and get that information. We also have the issue whereby between us putting the benefit statements onto the records to extract and extracting them, people again leave, so we remove those as well at that point rather than sending something out that obviously is not valid at that point in time. But also we have some people where they've actually asked to not receive either correspondence or the benefit statement from us, only 2 people, so not really a huge number. And then there's others where it could be anything from our data's not allowing it to run properly, or it looks wrong, so we're not willing to send it out. Again, we've got about 146 of those, which again, we're looking at that data to make sure that's improved. So overall, we believe that we've sent out 95.1% of benefit statements that should have been produced. And again, the requirement is to send 100%, so I suppose it's the board and the committee's decision whether they wish to report that as a breach, or if they believe that obviously the 1,127, although haven't received it and therefore is a breach of legislation, should just go onto the breach log internally, but not reportable to the pensions regulator. Obviously that's a board decision or committee decision. Deferred members were also due, so again 23,378. We actually produced 20,269, which is 86.7%. Those who haven't received them, there's always a number of people where pension increase isn't relevant, so we don't produce a benefit statement for those. They tend to be those who leave just prior to year end, and off the top of my head that's normally around about 2 weeks before year end. So therefore pension increase isn't invalid, but they would have got a benefit statement showing those benefits anyway. So technically they have received a benefit statement. We just didn't want to repeat that information again. The majority though are those that have gone away or we've lost contact with. Again, you've got 2 conflicting bits of legislation here. You've got the benefit statements where we should produce them and send them, no matter what, but you've also got data protection, whereby if you know someone's not living at that address, you should not provide financial information and member data to that address because the fact you know that person's not there. I've got a very good idea that that person's not there. We always prefer to not breach data protection, so we won't produce anything to anybody that's gone away. Again, it might be something that you want to look at in the sense of, do we want to do a review to see if we can find where these people are now living? There's plenty of companies out there now that produce that service, and they use things like the forwarding address with their Royal Mail to be able to locate people. It could be something that we could look at. We probably wouldn't find all of them, but we could find some of them. But again, we'll leave that with the board to make that decision. And finally, we have 10 where the widow's pension's missing, which is, again, is a data issue. We'll get those fixed and obviously get those out because it's only 10 people, so we'll get that sorted. Finally, the regulator common data and conditional data. Common data we're still producing. Conditional data, I'm still trying to get their report completed, unfortunately. It's one thing that COVID does seem to be delaying and being able to do, is some of the reporting that we do produce takes a little bit longer with people working from home. But I keep pushing for that to be done, and hopefully that will be done pretty soon, and try and get that in the next report if I can. But I'll give an update at that time. Customer service, again, working from home, because we do these on a manual basis, they have not been kept updated since the lockdown. Once we're back into the office fully, we'll be able to update those going forward. Recruitment, as Nick mentioned, we've got somebody in now working on the communication side of things. We're also hoping by the beginning of the next financial year to have what's called iConnect in place, which means that we'll get, instead of an annual year end, we'll do it on a monthly basis, and that will involve a bit more recruitment as well. It's a piece of software where employees can update directly into the member records with things like contribution and pay. Hopefully this will speed up things like year end. Certainly speaking to other authorities who have brought this in, it does seem to be quite large savings at the end of the year, and reduces the pressure so that we can actually work on reducing the number of non-issued benefit statements to an even lower amount. But again, we'll update the board as we go along once that's in place. So employee liaison, this past quarter we've actually had 9 employees that have been late. The majority of those again are coming down to COVID. We're keeping a very close eye on this to make sure that it's not something more longer term and a bigger issue than what it should be. And we'll keep an eye on that as we go forward and make sure that obviously where we can get those back paying on time and well within the time frames that I've put in front of them. And finally, we've got the performance charts. Again, with the concentration on making sure that we're meeting our SLAs, we're still meeting those since the lockdown. Working from home does seem to be working okay on the general admin. But again, we're still looking at improving certain areas. So we're looking to do a third-party printing service going forward. So therefore, we can literally do the printing directly from home, and we don't have to have somebody at the office physically printing that information off. It can go straight out that night. It'll be in the post, rather than possibly wait until the next morning when people are back in the office. So again, hopefully that will speed things up. So, any questions?
Any questions for Graham? Nick, do you have any comments or observations on the various issues that Graham's raised there?
Just to say that I think what we should be doing as a fund is recording all of the cases where we didn't get benefit statements out to people on a breaches log, and then making a formal decision that in these cases, for what the reasons Graham's given, that we won't be reporting ourselves to the regulator. But I think the follow-on to that is to, at some point, we do have to consider what do we do about these gonaways that we don't know where they live. Do we decide as a fund that we should make one attempt perhaps to trace them, or do we decide to trace any that are over 50 years old? Or and I guess really it's probably as well to work with XPS to find out what the options and the costs are for various different scenarios, I suppose.
I thought we visited this area a couple of years ago, and I can't remember what the decision was, but I thought we'd made a decision on it.
Well, that's a starting point. Then we'll have a look back and see what we decided.
Yeah, I think the previous one is normally when they get to retirement age, certainly state pension age, obviously we can contact the DWP, which, again, off the top of my head, I think it's something daft like £6.80 charge, something silly like that, to get a forwarding address. But obviously you wait until almost the pension benefits are due, which you could argue it makes sense because that's when the benefits are due. Whereas if you do a chase up now, unless, as Nick said, you wait until someone's 50, you might be doing this 2 or 3 times for the same person.
My recollection, and I might have this wrong, but my recollection was that XPS, or possibly it was Keir at that stage, had looked at using an agency to do the tracing, and had a costing, which I think we felt wasn't perhaps as expensive as we'd anticipated it might be.
Right.
We'll have another look, Colin.
I'll have a look.
Out.
Yeah. So maybe for the next meeting we could have a brief report on what we see as being the options for following that through.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Anything else from you, Nick, on this?
No, I don't think so.
Jackie?
I would agree with you. I think that what we need to do is have a look and keep a record of any breaches that we do make, so that we can analyse them and make a decision. Well, I know that you do.
Jackie, I can't hear you very, very well. Do
you know what I did? Paul brought me a cup. He brought me a cup of tea, and I shoved.
Oh, we saw the cup of tea coming.
Sorry, what I was going to say is that you didn't hear me. Is that I think that I agree with the fact that with Nick in terms of we have to record the breaches and then make a decision and I know you do record them, not breaches, but those that haven't gone out. Let's say it's not a breach until we've decided it is, and then make a decision upon that as to which we feel that we should inform the ombudsman or wherever it goes to nowadays. What do you think? What does anybody else think? Does anybody else think that that's how we should approach it?
That seems to be a sensible way forward, which I think is a good, practical, pragmatic solution.
Okay. I love cats.
Me and Nick have been attacked by the looks of it.
Oh, thanks for that. Just looking at some elements of this report, Graham, you commented on the small proportion of members who've registered for member self-service, and touched on the possibility of encouraging people. Do you have any specific suggestions about what could be done? Because clearly there's quite a big investment gone into member self-service, so it's in everyone's interest for people to be using it.
Yeah, I think a better way of promoting it is pushing it through the employers, and using them almost. We provide obviously the information to them and the communication, but using their internal communication channels to actually get that out to people and let them understand that that's available there for them. As I said, the newsletter is good because it goes to everybody, but I'm not sure how many people actually sit and will then read it and pick it up and do something with it. But almost as well for internally to almost look at it as well as part of the new starter process that we produce, almost like a code to get people on straight away, and do it that way as well, so that literally they can just log on and put the code in and they can be up and running once we've got the information. It's probably we'll just have to look and see how probably the better way of doing that. But certainly starting with the employers and getting the employers to promote it, and pushing that side of things, will work relatively well to start. And again, more people that get on and using it, hopefully word of mouth will then spread and it becomes a lot easier. There is an issue anyway with pensions in the sense that most people might start paying into it, but don't really get interested until about 2-3 years out from retirement, unless you're getting these pension savings statements and you've got the tax issues. But it's just trying to encourage people now, especially with the potential of a dashboard coming, of a pensions dashboard, to try and get slightly ahead of that so that people know that there's something there, that they can look at their pension benefits, see what's happening with them, do their calculations if they wish, and promote the benefits of it. And see what we can do in a sense as well of maybe doing some more presentations at employers. But again, we'll have to look to see exactly how that would work.
Have you set yourself any targets for increasing the uptake?
Not at this moment in time. We've always had it there for members, and we point them in that direction if people are asking questions, especially if they are slightly younger, because again, it gives them a chance to sit there and do multiple estimates. And again, if someone comes to us and says that they want estimates for the next 5 years, we'll probably point them at member self-service as well, just for the fact that it's easy for them to sit and then they can work out when roughly the best time for them to do it is. But where there is to answer questions once they've got the information. But although we've promoted it in the past, it's not really been pushed as much in the past.
So if you had a specific target, it might actually focus you a bit more in terms of, interfacing with employers and then ensuring that you're really pushing and promoting that use.
Yeah. And again, that's part of what the employee liaison team is there for as well, is to promote what we actually provide. Because obviously, again, it's being paid for, it might as well be used.
Yeah. Just moving on to it's page 125 of the pack that we've got, the internal dispute resolution process. One of the two known cases that you mentioned there is one from November last year regarding the non-receipt of an expression of wish form. On the face of it, it seems as if it's taking a long time to get that sorted out.
No, sorry, yeah, that's what I was saying. Although it mentions in this quarter, it's just reporting what's actually happened over the year, so you've got an idea of what's happened over the year. That one was a particular case. I believe that's gone on. It might still be with the ombudsman ended up that case because it's to do with a death grant. I'm trying to think what happened with the result of it. Whereas the family members reckon that the person had filled an expression of wish form in, stating a specific thing that her son was to get it and not her dependent.
Yes,
we had no receipt of it.
You've talked to us about this one previously, yeah. So it's that one. Okay, thanks. I think finally from me, the customer service report. Just interesting that the analysis that you give there with the previous responses and the current responses are almost identical. I find that surprising, given the quantities that we're talking about. I find it surprising that these are percentages and they're identical, almost to the second decimal place. What's going on there? It's
because it's cumulative, so therefore, obviously, the numbers that we've already received in, it doesn't impact. It probably needs changing in the sense of, what the scores have been for this quarter, compared to historical. There's probably a better way of looking at it. At the moment, it's cumulative, so it's literally, I said, we can get 300 responses in, but because we've got like 7,000 or 8,000 already there, it doesn't impact the overall score. So again, that's something I need to look at to try and make sure that's coming through correctly. But I'm hoping part of the move to this third-party printer as well is that we can actually look at all the questions that are being sent out and roll it out across everybody. So when we send a document out, we can ask, do you understand this letter? Which again comes back to the bit where you're talking about the comms. Do you understand this letter? Was it easy to, did you know what it was talking about? Did you understand it? Do you know what you now need to do? And make sure those questions are being asked on everything. Yeah. Yes. I mean, in general, the comments that you get seem to be fairly positive. But one of the points about doing this is to look for continuous improvement. And clearly, if a small number of new figures are just simply going into a collective pot, it's not going to add very much. So I think it would be worth looking at just what you can do in terms of that reporting. Yeah, I'll look at that. Just absolutely one last comment from me, just looking down here onto the bottom of page 129. I just didn't quite understand this. I'm sure it's just a typo, but if you just unpick what it is, it said, we're finding that employers are having difficulties under the current working restraints and are never late sending sheets. And I couldn't quite work out what particularly the typo was, whether it was telling us this is okay or whether it was telling us that in fact things are getting worse. It got worse for this quarter because, as I said, it's now about 3 or 4, and there was some that were never late, and now we've suddenly got 9 that are getting late. I think that's what it's actually trying to say, is that the ones who are never late, suddenly we've got some that are having particular problems with the COVID, and they've become late all of a sudden. Okay, yeah, right. I think I understand that. Thanks. Do we have any other questions or comments? And I don't think we have any other items. I don't think there's anything else for us, is there, Nick?
No, nothing from me.
Okay, splendid. Well, we have our next meeting. I'm afraid I didn't look up when it was, but I do know it's not till next year. So I'll, as usual, be the first to wish you a happy New Year when it comes, and hopefully a calmer and more interesting in a non-Chinese sense New Year in 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye.